Okay, let's take a look at this VARC assignment. This is based upon CL mock CDC 12. Now, in this particular mock, I could find two passages that were worth doing. Worth doing in the sense the questions were logical, except for one, which we'll talk about. But in other two passages, they were quite so. Passage was okay. One passage was okay, but the other passage was itself a little weird, and questions were equally weirder. So there's no point in even trying to attempt those two passages. Out of out of 8 questions, I could find 6 questions that were logical. So I've included those in this particular assignment. So let's take a look at the first RC. Now this RC is loaded with a lot of difficult words, and there is a reason behind it. There's a point that the author is trying to convey, and therefore you might find the language, not the language, but the vocabulary a little more difficult to understand than the usual passages. So let's see. The epistemological landscape. So we already know epistemological means knowledge related. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy that deals with knowledge. So epistemological landscape of scientific discourse is characterized by its own lexicographic vernacular, a linguistic corpus that has been painstakingly cultivated through decades of rigorous academic and empirical inquiry. So what he's trying to say here is that this scientific discourse, whatever knowledge landscape is there, that has its own lexicographic, means it has its own own words or own vocabulary. Lexicographic, basically lexicon is the dictionary, and lexicography is basically that the usage of words. So it has its own specific usage of words, a linguistic corpus that has been painstakingly cultivated through decades of rigorous academic and empirical inquiry. So after a rigorous academic and empirical inquiry, that they have developed their own lingo, you can say, or jargon, you can say, or vocabulary, you can say. While this specialized lexicon enables a high level of precision in interdisciplinary communication, it simultaneously acts a form of intellectual gatekeeping, rendering scientific literature largely impenetrable to lay audiences. Elements such as esoteric terminology, convoluted sentence structures, and a dearth of narrative flair collectively contribute to the exclusionary nature of scientific writing. So what he's saying is that the scientific writing is so difficult to understand because of the way it has been developed, the language, the vocabulary, and though it enables intradisciplinary communication to a high level of precision, but it acts in the form of gatekeeping. That means the ordinary people, the lay people, cannot understand it. So the lay audience or the common person cannot understand scientific literature. So they use esoteric, means known to a very few people, terminology, convoluted sentence structures, and there is no narrative flair. So all of this makes it exclusionary. So this particular paragraph deals with describing what is the difficulty in trying to understand the scientific communication. It is basically restricted to only those intradisciplinary people, and a lay person will not be able to understand it easily. Jargonistic terms like double-blind experiment, null hypothesis, mRNA serve as exemplars. Now, they've given some examples of certain terminology. They are recondite, means difficult to understand. Labels that, while instrumental for expert-level discussion, create an intellectual chasm for individuals devoid of advanced scientific education. These lexemes thus not only mystify the subject matter, but also perpetuate a deficit public comprehension of fundamental scientific concepts. So he's given some examples of it. But these kind of terminology, which are very difficult to understand, known to a very few people. So what it does is it creates a chasm, means gap, and therefore many people are not able to understand it, and there is a deficit in public comprehension of fundamental scientific concepts we are not able to understand. The notion of intelligibility is not antithetical to scientific communication. Rather, it can and should be viewed as complementary. In other genres of writing, journalistic prose, for instance, clarity and adherence to grammatical conventions are paramount. Hence, there is no justifiable reason for scientific literature to obfuscate its findings through labyrinthine syntax or an excessive reliance on the passive voice. So, intelligibility is not antithetical to scientific communication. Right? That means intelligence should be complementary. Right? It should be going side by side. That means scientific communication should be viewed as intelligent, and people should be able to understand it. In other genres of writing, like journalistic prose, clarity and all these things are very important, paramount. So there is no reason why scientific literature should obfuscate. Obfuscate means to hide, okay, or to make it unclear. Its findings through labyrinthine means very complex syntax or excessive reliance on passive voice. So he's saying when journalistic prose can be very clear and adhere to grammatic conventions, then why can't this scientific communication be? This inaccessibility is not just a hurdle for general populace, but also poses a daunting challenge for nascent scholars within the scientific community. So it is not just problematic for normal people, but also for nascent scholars, means somebody who just come into this field, somebody who's a budding scientist. Undergraduate students, despite being initiates in the discipline, often find themselves bewildered when attempting to dissect academic papers. Regrettably, they are often left to their own devices, having been provided insufficient tutelage in the hermeneutics of scientific literature. The predominant pedagogical model thus hence perpetuates a cyclical epistemological crisis, entrapping students in a Sisyphean struggle with an ever-steepening learning curve. So, what he's saying is, that now this is a problem not just for the lay person or a general person, but also for a new scholar in this field. So they are often bewildered, they are perplexed when they're trying to dissect academic papers, and they are then are left to their own devices because they haven't been trained in the hermeneutics, means the interpretation of language. Okay, interpretation of language is hermeneutics. So this scientific literature interpretation may they have got insufficient tutelage or tutoring. So nobody explains to them that, okay, scientific literature should be interpreted in this particular way. So therefore, they try to find their own devices. And therefore, the predominant pedagogical model hence perpetuates a cyclical epistemological crisis. So there is a crisis. Now, students are in a Sisyphean. Sisyphus, we know that a person who was asked to roll a boulder to the mountaintop and again it comes back. So he keeps doing it, again it comes back. So that's the Sisyphus. So that's a struggle with an ever steepening learning curve. Okay, so here so far it was more from a perspective of a lay audience, but now he's saying even the scholars, the nascent scholars, are facing the same problem. Recent empirical analysis substantiate these critiques. For instance, Juliana Vedi, a researcher, elucidated the suboptimal accessibility and reader engagement of lay summaries in scientific journals. Her findings not only highlight the deficiencies in existing modes of scientific communication, but also show the ineffective implementation of strategies aimed at ameliorating the schism between expert and lay audiences. So this was again not just it was not just basically it's not just the opinion of somebody, but it's been shown through empirical analysis also. So this Juliana Vedi, she conducted a research and she found out that the reader engagement and accessibility of lay summaries in scientific journals is very, very poor. And there's a deficiency in existing modes of scientific communication and also ineffective implementation strategies to ameliorate, means to improve this gap, okay, or fill this gap between expert and lay audiences. There is hardly anything being done. Despite the demonstrable public trust in science, the survey data indicating 90% of individuals express confidence in scientific expertise and 52% acknowledge its daily relevance. A disconcerting 4% is more inclined to source scientific information from social media platforms. So people are very interested. People have confidence in scientific expertise and people acknowledge its relevance, but hardly 44%. So 44%, not hardly, a huge amount of population is inclined to get it from social media platform. This disjunction has manifested in alarming social consequences, including 61% surge in public health crisis. See, obviously, whatever you get from social media platforms, so we all know that's WhatsApp University. So people, if you rely on WhatsApp University or on some other social media to get your scientific knowledge, then you can understand how good it will be. So therefore, there was a huge surge in public health crisis, 57% escalation in polarization of science-related beliefs among public. So obviously, then all kinds of nonsense keeps getting floated around, forwarded around, and people who don't know anything also they claim that they know a lot. So this is a challenge in an era that is grappling with an escalating dissemination of misinformation. The imperative for making scientific writing more accessible has never been more acute. The infusion of narrative elements can serve as a catalytic agent in sustaining reader engagement, thereby serving to democratize scientific knowledge. It is perhaps worth noting the irony that this very article, while advocating for greater simplicity and accessibility in scientific communication, is itself steeped in the kind of complex academic language can be difficult for non-experts to penetrate. So this is a very funny, humorous thing, but of course it is ironic also that he's saying that this particular article is advocating simplicity and accessibility in scientific communication, but itself is using complex academic language. Though it is very interesting for so somebody who has been reading now for quite a while. I think all of you you should have found this very interesting, okay, and very stimulating. This kind of language is very stimulating. However, a person who is not used to reading such language may feel intimidated. This paradox serves not as a refutation of the article's argument, not as a refutation of the article's argument, but rather as a stark illustration of the pressing issue at hand. So this is not to show that this is in any way challenging or refuting or undermining or casting a doubt on the article's argument, but it is just showing a stark illustration. This is how things are. That if we want to promote greater simplicity and accessibility, then we should use a simple language and not really a complex academic language. Right. So this passage is very interesting, and it talked about how difficult the scientific language is for not just the lay person, but also for new scholars. And it has been shown empirically also. And the author is advocating that in this era of misinformation, where most of the people are now going to social media, and that is of course very dangerous, as can be seen in the surge in public health crisis and in polarization of science-related beliefs. So language should be made simpler, and no better way to convey this than the irony being used in this article itself. Okay, let's look at the questions. Questions were two questions initially. They were quite weird, and it took a little while to understand what is he asking. The author would least likely agree that the pedagogical methods in science need to incorporate dash rather than dash. Now, this is a very twisted question. Had it been most likely, then in second blank, we would have actually fit this specialized vocabulary, selective barriers, scholar 650, because this is what, so suppose this question was, the author is most likely to agree that pedagogical methods need to incorporate X rather than Y. So this Y could be all of these. This Y could be any of these, because author doesn't advocate these. Author is saying that we shouldn't be using a specialized vocabulary, we shouldn't be using selective barrier, we shouldn't be using scholarly exclusivity. We should be making it clear for all, clarity of content. Right. So if the question was most likely agree that pedagogical methods need to incorporate X rather than Y, then there could be any of these. But this is least likely, and therefore whatever remains, the clarity of content, this becomes the answer. Okay, the first part, audience captivation, least like to agree that pedagogical methods need to incorporate audience captivation. This I'm not very clear what it exactly means by this. So he doesn't need to incorporate this. See what the author is, this question is, the author says that the pedagogical methods does not need to incorporate X, but may need to incorporate Y. So for our purpose, so this is not a, again, as I say, there's some bit of it which is illogical. The first part is illogical. The second part is clear. These three, obviously, he is not recommending. I mean, he will not recommend. He will be most likely to agree that these are not needed, but he's least likely to agree that this is not needed, right? Least likely to agree that they need to incorporate clarity of content. So D becomes the correct answer. If the author were to recommend changes to how quantum physics is taught or discussed in academic settings, which one of the following would they least recommend? Again, least recommend. So if the author was to recommend changes to how quantum physics is taught or discussed in academic settings, okay, so which is least recommended? Instead of using terms like quantum entanglement and wave function collapse, initial discussion could describe this phenomenon of particles that are mysteriously connected and a setting of probabilities. Okay, so you will simplify it. Fine. So he will definitely recommend this. So this is not the answer. Students will engage in debates that force them to consider societal and ethical implications of quantum technology. Fine. This was okay. This will be recommended. Textbooks or papers on quantum physics would be structured like a journey of discovery where the evolution of theories and concepts is laid out in a narrative format. Now, let's look at the last one. Encourage journals on quantum mechanics to include non-experts in the peer review process to do the final check. Now, non-experts, if you are putting in peer review process in journals on quantum mechanics, then that is the wrong thing to do, right? This is a very specific scholarly journal. So how can a non-expert participate in this peer review process? So this is definitely least likely that the author will recommend. So this becomes the answer. But as per me, even this is a little bit of an answer, because this narrative thing, laid out in a narrative format. This is given for lay people, for the general public. The infusion of narrative element can serve as a catalytic agent in sustaining reader engagement, thereby serving to democratize scientific knowledge. This narrative phenomenon is given basically for lay person. That how do you disseminate scientific information to the lay person or the common person in a more engaging manner? So you try to do it with a in a narrative element, right? So narrative element, how would you use it for a scholar or for a person who is learning the science? I don't know. So, I mean, I would have even thought that this also would have been the correct answer. Textbooks or papers could be structured like a journey of discovery where the evolution is laid out in a narrative format. This is more suitable for normal person. How discussed in academic settings, I don't think this is suitable. So as per me, even this answer is okay, but this is little better because this is absolutely correct. You cannot give non-experts any kind of say in academic settings, right? So, but this is not again a very good question. So you can very well understand that if you have not included those two other passages, how bad they could be. When in this also we could find within the two questions itself this bit of inconsistency. Anyway, let's go on. Which of the following best describes the conclusion from Juliana Vedi's study? This is a very simple question. High trust in science coexists with societal harm from social media sourcing. Juliana Vedi's study was not at all about social media, so this is totally wrong. Significant majority of people have confidence in scientific expertise, totally 180-degree opposite. There are deficiencies in existing modes of scientific analysis, very clearly given here. Juliana Wade's suboptimal accessibility reader engagement in lay summaries not only highlight the deficiencies in existing modes of scientific analysis. So this is a very straightforward question. So this is the correct answer. Simplified writing styles can help disciplines balance clarity and simplified writing styles. This is not the conclusion here. Okay. Deficiencies is there and ineffective implementation strategy. She's never recommended that simplified writing or anything. So this is wrong. None of the following comes closest to the writing strategy adopted by the author except, which means which is closest to the author's writing strategy, which is closest to the writing strategy. The article itself exemplifies the inaccessibility issue being critiqued. Yes, the article itself exemplifies the inaccessibility issue, which means the language is so complicated and twisted that it is difficult for a lay person to understand. So this article itself had that kind of language. As he said, that it is perhaps worth noting the irony that this very article, while advocating for greater simplicity and accessibility, is itself steeped in the kind of complex academic language that can be difficult for non-experts to penetrate. Right. So this looks okay. We'll keep. The article uses anecdotes to pursue it. The anecdotes means real life events. So which is wrong. Eschews means avoids personal commentary focusing on objective. Totally wrong. The article employs irony to suggest contentment with the existing complexity. See, this part is okay. It employs irony, no doubt. It employs irony, but to suggest contentment with the existing complexity, which means that author is content or he is satisfied with the current complexities that are there in scientific communication. That is exactly 180-degree opposite. He is not at all satisfied, and that is why he is reading this article, isn't it? Why would he be content? If he was content, then there is no need to write this article. Therefore, this irony part is okay, but this doesn't suggest contentment. So this is wrong. Correct answer is 1. Right. So in this passage, you can say that this question and this third and fourth are very clear and very logical question. There was no wrong problem with them. This question had a little bit of an issue because third also could have been an answer, and in this we could just go by the second part and mark the answer. All right. So passage interesting again. Sometimes again the stupidity of the guy who creates these passages, these questions, it comes in waves. I mean, see, just look at this. See, this fellow, whoever has written this or created the question, he's not at all a quantum physics expert or anything of that sort. So how can he even wear those shoes or try to say that this should be taught in X way or this should be taught in Y manner on quantum entanglement or quantum technology? I mean, he's actually again overextending whatever charter has been given to him. These kind of questions should never appear, if you ask me. He's not a quantum physics expert, and that he'll go and explain that this is the way quantum physics should be taught in a class in science. So, I mean, that's how these things are made. Okay, let's go ahead. Few places are as inhospitable as top of Lulia. मुझे तो लल्लन top लग रहा है ये. So we can call it Lullan Top, right? So few places are as inhospitable as Lullan Top, a 6,700-meter volcano on the border between Chile and Argentina. So there's a very at a very high altitude there's a volcano between the border on the border of Chile and Argentina. Winds howl non-stop and no plants live there. Daytime temperatures never get above freezing and plummet even more come nightfall. Oxygen levels are just 40% of those at sea level, too low for mammals to live there. Or so biologists thought until 3 years ago, when a research team captured a live leaf-eared mouse at its summit. So this place has been described, which is inhospitable. That means hardly anybody can live there. And it is too low for any kind of mammals, the oxygen levels. That's what these biologists thought. But 3 years back, they captured a live leaf-eared mouse. There could be some type of mouse that has ears shaped like leaves. Now, new work shows this animal was not a fluke. So it is not that this animal was just found there accidentally. Team has found other leaf-eared mice on additional volcano taps, and genomic studies of these summit dwellers and their lower elevation relatives confirm the rodents make their homes 7,000 meters above sea level, making them the highest dwelling vertebrate found so far. So this was not a fluke. Other such similar mice have been found and at nearly 7,000 meters, and therefore and the genomic studies between these and their lower elevation relatives confirm that they are at 7,000 meters. And team has also come across 5 other mouse species living above 5,000 meters on various mountains in Central India. So this is the highest dwelling vertebrate found so far. The cold temperatures and low oxygen associated with high altitudes have long been thought to limit the heights where cold-blooded and even warm-blooded animals can permanently live. Mammals in general are not very good at dealing with low oxygen requirements, said Catherine Ivy. They require oxygen to convert food into energy. And the colder the environment, the more energy they need. So whereas a 1,000-kilogram hairy yak can thrive at 5,000 meters, small animals living at those heights shed heat faster and were expected to have trouble generating enough energy to keep warm. So now the challenges in surviving at such high altitudes because of cold temperatures and low oxygen levels. So that has been given here that, okay, you can have a huge yak. Yak is an animal that lives at 5,000 meters heights kind of situations. So because it is so huge and it doesn't leave, it doesn't shed energy or heat very fast, therefore it can survive. But small animals, they shed heat very fast, and therefore they will have trouble generating enough energy to keep warm. Jeffrey Good and colleagues sequenced P. vacuum from different elevations. The mice have not diverged much. So there was a genetic sequencing done. So mice have not diverged much. I'm sure one species goes from sea level to 6,739 meters. So one species goes from this level. Biologists often find that along such a large elevation gradient as animals specialize into subspecies and even new species. Storch thinks the leaf-eared mouse originally evolved up high and is gradually expanding into lower elevations. So there is a evolutionary genomist, and they are looking at genomes of mice at different elevations. So they are surprised that one species can go from sea level to this, but then the other people, they have found that maybe they think that it originally evolved up high and it is now moving towards lower elevations. Still, the DNA analysis did reveal some difference within the species. Leaf-eared mice living about 6,000 meters had genomes more similar to one another than to the lower dwelling kin. So within these, they were more similar. The mice living at 6,000 meters, and with the ones which were living at lower altitude, they had very different genomes. It is really cool to see that they were closely related. It helps solidify that these mice were actually breeding and residing at these altitudes. So this is a kind of a surety, because the mice live at least 650 meters above the volcano vegetation line and sometimes thousands of meters above. What they eat is a mystery. Preliminary analysis suggests lichens are a big part. So There's no vegetation. So what they eat? So that is what is a mystery. It's also not clear how the mice stay warm. Early data suggests that Andes mice do not have same genetic alterations that help deer mice living 4350 meters high cope with the cold. Whatever the adaptations, I might add leaf-eared mice to my list of extremophiles, normally reserved for microorganisms. Their existence shows it's important not to underestimate the capacity of species to invade and adapt to seemingly inhospitable environments. So how the mice stay warm is also not clear, because they don't have that kind of alteration that these other mice living in Rocky Mountains in the US have. And so whatever it is, this is an extremophile, and we should not underestimate the capacity of species to live in seemingly inhospitable environments. All right, so this passage talks about these leaf-eared mice that are found at very high altitudes, and how they within themselves they are similar in terms of genes. They are different from their lower altitude relatives. The passage primarily focuses on describing the unique diets. Diet to सिर्फ lichens बताया है. This is not at all primary focus. Contradicting traditional beliefs about mammalian adaptability to extreme environmental conditions. Yes, this can be, because traditional beliefs that mammals cannot adapt. ये है ना यहाँ पे too low for mammals to live there, right? Or so biologists thought. Therefore, this we can keep. Presenting a debate among experts on the role of genes in the adaptability. There is no debate here that is at all. Offering evidence that mice at high altitudes have developed new genetic mutations to cope with harsh conditions. No, that's not what they have done, because it's still not clear whether they have developed. So he says early data suggests that mice do not have the same genetic alterations that this, whatever their adaptation. So what the way they have adapted to that particular height or harsh condition, that is not clear. So there is no evidence there. So this is anyway wrong. Second is the correct answer. Which of the following most accurately encapsulates experts' reactions to the discovery of leaf-eared mice at such high altitude? All right. Intrigued but skeptical due to its incongruence with established theories. So they are intrigued, means they are definitely intrigued means mystified or puzzled. But skeptical, they are doubtful. So there is no doubt here. What is there to doubt? You have mice which have been caught and mice which have been found there, and it is not a fluke. So how can you be skeptical? Highly impressed with findings substantiate recent theories. They are not highly impressed or anything. Surprised and intrigued by the potential for species adaptability. Yes, this we can definitely say that they are surprised and intrigued. They are not skeptical. Okay, they are, of course, they are intrigued by the potential for species adaptability. So this looks quite okay. Reserved because more studies are needed to validate. Reserved, no, there is nothing, and there is no study that has been mentioned here that more studies are needed to validate the findings. They have found enough number of mice there, and they have been doing the genome sequencing also, and they've been able to find great commonality in genes between those mice that reside at high altitudes, and there is a difference between those then which reside at low altitude. So there is no need to validate or do more studies. So 3 is the right answer. Okay, surprised and intrigued. Intrigued means fascinated or really interested. In terms of the genomes, the leaf-eared mice living above 6,000 meters. So genomes के बारे में पढ़ा हुआ हमने, इसमें सिंपली क्वेश्चन होने वाला है ये कि जो आपस में जो जीनोम 6,000 मीटर्स पे रहते हैं वो क्लोज हैं उनके जीन्स, और जो उनके डिफरेंट जो दूर है नीचे रहते हैं उनसे दूर है. तो शेयर लिटिल जेनेटिक कन्वर्जेंस कंपेयर्ड टू देयर लो ऑल्टीट्यूड काउंटरपार्ट्स. नॉट एट ऑल, they share a lot of genetic. So they share little genetic convergence compared to their low altitude counterparts. Okay, so they don't have much genetic convergence. Now, little means hardly any. So ऐसा है क्या? Let's read this. Leaf-eared mice living above 6,000 have genomes more similar to one another than to their lower. That means they had some genes similar to the lower dwelling kin also, but they had more genes similar to the higher dwelling kin. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि लिटिल जेनेटिक कन्वर्जेंस की उनके अंदर कोई है ही नहीं. So this is wrong. Okay, they show a reasonable genetic convergence, but obviously that convergence with their high altitude counterparts is much more. Evolved in high altitudes and migrated to low altitude locations. Living above this evolved in high in terms of genomes का इसका कोई link नहीं है ये. There is no link with this. Are more genetically diverged from their low altitude relatives than they are from each other. Yes, this is perfectly fine. Share identical genetic traits with other. No, are not identical. Identical तो मतलब exactly same होगा. Exactly same नहीं. उनके similar हैं, more similar to their high altitude species compared to the low altitude. So this is also wrong. So this was an easy question. Now here comes a very ridiculous kind of a question. It says, based on the information provided in the passage, which of the following statements are experts most certain of with regard to the leaf-eared mice living at high altitudes? Evolutionary history. So are they certain about the evolutionary history? Are you certain about oxygen usage, adaptation to cold, and procreation? So the answer here given is 4. And the reasoning that is given here is that because we are able to find their genes and compare their genes with their high altitude counterpart, low altitude counterpart, therefore we can be sure of the procreation. But we cannot be sure of oxygen usage. We cannot be sure of adaptation to cold. So what is, first of all, what this question is asking? Experts most certain of, in what sense? In what sense? So are they not certain of oxygen usage, in the sense that oxygen usage के बारे में दिया क्या यहाँ पे कि this oxygen levels are 40%. Oxygen levels are just 40%. Too low for mammals to live there. That's okay. But then these animals, they live there. So what is there to be sure or not sure of? Okay, had the question been, which of the following statements are the experts most certain of regarding the adaptability of leaf-eared mice living at high altitude? Regarding the adaptability or what makes them adaptable? Then if he had said they are not certain about oxygen usage, how they are able to live at such low oxygen, whether they understand adaptation to cold, whether they understand, no. Right? But are most certain of with respect to this question itself is faulty, illogical question. And this procreation, which has been given based upon the genomic sequencing, this also doesn't really make too much sense. So anyway, 4th is the option which is given. And this one question I found in this passage quite absurd, if you ask me. This question itself is absurd and the options are equally absurd. However, 4th is the answer given. So I just included this passage because passage was good to read, to know some things. Okay, we today, at least after reading this, we come to know that there are mice which are living at 6,500 meters of elevation, and they're able to adapt themselves to such extreme environments. So that's a learning, and so passage was interesting in that sense. And these 3 questions were worth doing, and therefore I included this. But this is a stupid question. There's absolutely no doubt about it. All right, so let's go to the. So if you look at these first 2, first was difficult to read, but very interesting, and we should have got this at least 3rd and 4th questions correct, and maybe one of these. So 3 and 3 out of these would have been a good show in this. All right, let's look at the VA part here. So emotional crescendos of deep breaths, sighs, moans, and nascent tears will rise in my throat before being released into the world. This is, of course, not the opening statement of the sentence, because it talks about emotional crescendos. Crescendos means the height, the final stage. Okay, if you listen to any symphony or any piece of music and the music rises, intensity rises, in the end it comes to a crescendo. That is the final peak. So emotional crescendos of deep breaths, sighs, moans will rise in my throat. So this definitely has linked to some other sentence. My body will kneel in a gesture of surrender on stones that rest atop the native soil of overgrown Tongawa Kitsch land in South Los Angeles. So maybe this fellow is kneeling in a gesture of surrender on some temple or some place of worship. I don't know what it is. It could be anything, but this fellow is kneeling in a gesture of surrender on stones. So this can be the opening statement. Amidst this is not the opening statement. As I lower myself, my face will come close to the roots of towering trees, which seem to bear silent witness to my act. So 2 से start कर देंगे. And as I lower myself, so he's kneeling, right? So my body will kneel. Now he's kneeling. As he lowers himself, his face will come close to the roots of towering trees. 2 के बाद में 4 आएगा. And then emotional crescendos of deep breath and all these things rise in his throat before we release. So he becomes so emotional. He's choked with emotion. So obviously, once he's lowering himself, his face is coming close. So all these emotions seem to be coming out. So 1. And then we'll go to 3. Amidst these kind of emotions, a vivid indigo liquid will manifest within my kidneys and mind's eye, pulling me into a spiritual vortex that travels through the soil, the root, the worms, plunging past the mountain core, ultimately connecting me to the murky depths, all guided by an elusive frequency that calls to me. I don't know what he's trying to say, but let's not try to make too much sense of this. Let's just try to mark it 2413 and move ahead. What is this vivid indigo liquid that will manifest itself? So amidst this all, so this will basically too much of a description that will come in the end. All right, let's move to the next one. To be sure, creative works disintegrate. This could be the opening statement. This is an independent statement. The farther back in time we look for signs of creativity, the fewer creative works of that time will remain with us today. This seems to be connected to the first one, is it not? To be sure, creative works disintegrate. That means whatever is the work of art or creative work, let's say there's a sculpture, or let's say there is some piece of some picture or painting or any kind of artifact. If it is left in open, obviously it will disintegrate. The further back in time we look for signs of creativity, the fewer creative works of that time remain with us today. So 1 and 2 kind of becomes a mandatory pair. But by corroborating theory and data from different fields, we are on our way putting forward an coherent picture of how and when creative abilities of humans grow. This but gives a clear contrast to this second statement. The farther back in time, the fewer works remain, but by corroborating theory and data from different fields, we put together a coherent picture. So this 3 comes here. Now you are left with one sentence, which is 4. So 4 where would you put it? Looking at an artifact fashioned thousands or millions of years ago in an awe-inspiring experience, because it gives us a glimpse into the lives and worldview of our ancient ancestors. Now, does it make any sense at 4 in the end? But by corroborating theory and data, we are on our way to putting together a coherent picture of how and when the creative abilities of humans arose. There's a question, how and when we started becoming creative. Looking at the artifact fashion is an awe-inspiring experience. This doesn't really connect to this third sentence, so rather we would put it in the beginning. So looking at an artifact fashioned 1,000 years ago is an awe-inspiring experience. It gives us a glimpse into the lives and worldview. To be sure, these integrate, right? So fine, we are looking for artifact, but then they disintegrate. So further back in science, we look for, so we are looking for signs of creativity. So see, this also is connected to this one, 4th. Okay, we are looking for signs of creativity, and then 3rd is very clearly linked. We are putting together a coherent picture of how and when creative abilities of humans are. So 4, 1, 2, 3 becomes the correct one. Okay, let's go to the next one. Rabindranath Tagore's Kabuliwala captures the immigrant experience like no other story. This can be the opening statement. It reminds us. So the dependent sentence. Whether it's Americans who are scared of Mexicans or Germans who are scared of Syrian, everyone should read the Kabuliwala because it reveals something we have forgotten. This is again a dependent statement because it cannot come in the beginning. This Kabuliwala has already been mentioned, Rabindranath Tagore's Kabuliwala. So this will come in the beginning. Real life Kabuliwala was very much feared in 19th century, but here in this story refers to Rabindranath Tagore. So 1 will start and we will move to 4. So Kabuliwala captures the immigrant experience like no other story. Real life Kabuliwalas were very much feared in 19th century India, but here in this story, we see a Kabuliwala who's also a father. I'm sure quite a few of you have read this story in your Hindi or in some other class in school. Kabuliwala, so the guy used to come from Afghanistan, Kabul. So now where do we go? Okay, 1, 4. Now the question is whether 2, 3 or 3, 2. That's very important here. So it reminds us that the person coming to our country carrying a memento, a handprint of the child is a parent, like we could be a parent, human being, like we are a human being. So does it make sense? After 4, we go to 2. or it reminds us what we have forgotten. It reveals something we have forgotten. Whether it's Americans who are scared of Mexicans or Germans who are scared of Syrian, everyone should read the Kabuliwala because it reveals something we have forgotten. It reminds us that person coming. So this is what we have forgotten. That person coming to our country carrying a memento, handprint of their child is a parent, like we could be a parent, a human being like we are. So we have forgotten that these are also human beings. Okay, we look at these people as Mexicans, or Germans look at Syrian migrants. So we look at these people as just migrants, whereas we should be looking at them as a human being, right? So that is the idea that we seem to have forgotten. So therefore, 3 would actually come before 2, right? So 3 should come. 3 should come before 2, right? So 3, 2. It reveals something we have forgotten. It reminds us the person is a parent, like we could be a parent, a human being like we are. All right. Summary. One summary was totally absurd, absolutely not at all worth doing. So therefore, I've left it out. During the 90s, throughout Eastern Europe, people witnessed profound economic changes. The transformation period was characterized by contradictions, gave rise to great political and economic accomplishments, but also innumerable socio-economic tragedies. So 90s में Eastern Europe में there were profound economic changes. Transformation period में contradictions थे, political accomplishment थे, economic, but also innumerable socio-economic tragedies. Social upward mobility expectations for many did not materialize. In disadvantaged regions, poverty surged, many lives were lost due to health-related complications. In an analogy to the deindustrializing Rust Belt in the US, social scientists have described the profound health consequences in certain regions and societies of Eastern as deaths of despair. In some areas, especially in the post-Soviet societies further east, economic shock became a persistent reality. So he's describing the period after the USSR disintegrated. So all of those countries that were a part of USSR bloc plus Eastern Europe, those were communist bloc countries. See, there were many communist bloc countries, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, a lot of countries that were communist bloc countries. And after USSR disintegration, they also started their journey towards capitalism. So there were profound economic changes. It gave rise to great economic and political accomplishment. But on the other hand, there were huge socio-economic tragedies for people who could not move upward. They were disadvantaged and the poverty surged, many lives were lost. And these health consequences were very, very severe. So economic shock became a reality. So after the disintegration of Soviet Union in 1990, there were two things that were seen, contradictory things. On one hand, there was a huge prosperity. On the other hand, there was despair, poverty. So 90s in Europe witnessed a complex landscape of economic change with both positive development and depths of despair due to poverty and health issues in disadvantaged areas. This is okay, we'll keep it. Eastern Europe during 90s experienced a transition from initial economic prosperity to a range of complex social issues. This is totally wrong because it's not as if there was a total economic prosperity across the board and then they moved into complex social issues. Nothing like that had been written. ये जो प्रॉस्पेरिटी थी वो कुछ लोगों की थी, कुछ लोगों की गरीबी थी. यहाँ पे ये बता रहा है कि सभी की प्रॉस्पेरिटी थी and then they moved to different issues. So this is wrong. During 90s, Eastern Europe achieved significant and profound economic accomplishments, yet these were overshadowed by a disconcerting range in tragedies. This is also wrong. This doesn't say that on both positive development भी थे और negative development भी थे. The 90s in Europe were laden, Eastern Europe were laden with escalating socio-economic issues and health-related complications. Consequently, the term deaths of despair was introduced to encapsulate this pervasive atmosphere of failure. This doesn't talk about the positive developments. Okay, it doesn't talk about the positive or great political and economic accomplishment. This just shows that in 90s, Europe was laden across the board with socio-economic issues. जैसे यहाँ पे था, ठीक है? तो this fourth is also wrong. Correct answer is 1. So this was okay. There is a significant transition between freedom of expression and administration of justice because of high public interest in maintaining and protecting both principles. Contempt of court is an exigent part of judiciary. Besides, basic principle for democratic country is considered to be that people are supreme and all judicial authorities are their servant. यहाँ पे contempt of court की बात चल रही है. Okay, so if let's say you say something against a justice or a judge or something or a court, then you can be held in contempt of court and charged. Now he's saying that there are two parts to it. Okay, this is important, but we also have to give people the freedom of expression. Basic principle of democratic country is to consider that people are supreme and all judicial authorities are their servants. So so in a way, he's suggesting that you can say anything you want, but surely the Supreme Court has the right to criticize the servant if the servant does not act or behave properly. The Supreme, not Supreme Court. The Supreme means the Janta. Supreme is the Janta. Or servant kaun hai? Servant is the judiciary. So he's saying that logically, Supreme has the right to criticize the servant if the servant does not behave or act properly. That means the Janta can criticize the judiciary if the judiciary does not act properly. In a democratic country, the purpose of the contempt action can only be extended to ensure the proper functioning of the court. The power is not to prevent the master, the people from criticizing the servant, the judges and other authorities if the latter does not function properly or commits misconduct. In other words, the people are free and have the right to criticize the judges, but they should not go to the extent that it makes the functioning of the judiciary extremely difficult. So he's saying we have to balance it out. On one hand, we have people. Okay, people are supreme. People are supreme because it's a democracy. Then we have judiciary. Now, judiciary, he's referring it as a servant. That means they are meant to serve people. So, logically speaking, the Supreme has the right to criticize the servant because this is a democracy. But that right should not go to the extent that it undermines the functioning of the judiciary. That means there is a limit. So beyond which it would be called contempt of court. Right? So contempt of court ko challenge kiya hoga kisi ne that person or people are supreme in any democracy and they should be allowed to say whatever they want against the judiciary. But if it starts undermining the functioning of the judiciary, then it is not allowed. They should not go to the extent. That's what author is saying. So there has to be a limit. So in democratic systems, contempt of court is viewed as an archaic measure given the people's ultimate freedom to criticize judges and authorities. Contempt of court is viewed as an archaic measure given the people's ultimate freedom. Archaic means obsolete. So contempt of court is obsolete. That's okay, but where is the limit? इसमें लिमिट की बात नहीं कही है. ठीक है, it is contempt of court should not be there because people are supreme. They have the ultimate freedom to criticize judges and authorities. But where is the limit? This is wrong. Contempt of court in democratic systems fosters respectful public dialogue about judicial practices, given the supreme servant relationship between people and judicial authorities. So contempt fosters respectful. ऐसा तो नहीं बोल रहा है वो. Contempt of court fosters. Contempt of court, how can it foster public dialogue, respectful public dialogue about judicial practices? So this is also wrong. In democracies, contempt of court is designed to protect judges from public criticism, thereby sustaining an unblemished judicial system. ये ठीक है, this is okay that contempt of court is designed to protect the judiciary. Judges नहीं है, judiciary है पूरा. So this is also wrong here. Judiciary, okay, but then beyond a point, ये नहीं लिखा इसमें. Thereby sustaining an unblemished. So that means the judicial system should be unblemished. Nobody should point any finger towards it. That is wrong. In democratic countries, contempt of court balances judicial integrity with citizen rights to critique as long as it doesn't disrupt court functions. This is the correct answer. Okay. The irony encapsulated in hippopotomonstrousesquipedaliophobia serves a pedagogical purpose. So this is a very funny word. This is the longest word. And this word itself means the fear of long words. Okay, this word itself means fear of long words. Hippopotomonstrousesquipedaliophobia. Okay, this phobia is a fear. So very interesting passage this is. The irony encapsulated this serves a pedagogical purpose. इससे एक सिखाता है, कुछ सिखाया है. Pedagogy means सिखा रहा है. So hippopotomonstrousesquipedaliophobia is a term that encapsulates a sense of irony within its very construction. Now, can we put it at one? Irony तो बोल रहा है यहाँ पे. The irony in this serves a pedagogical purpose. But is there a pedagogical purpose defined here? While purporting to describe a fear of long words, the term itself is a 33-letter behemoth, likely to instigate the very anxiety it aims to label. ये भी वो irony है, जैसा फर्स्ट पैसेज था कि आपने एक पैसेज ऐसा बनाया जिसमें लैंग्वेज इतनी कॉम्प्लेक्स यूज कर दी, जब यही बताने की लैंग्वेज सिंपल होनी चाहिए. दैट वाज आयरनी देयर. यहाँ पे भी दिस वर्ड इटसेल्फ इज एन आयरनी. This is not a mere coincidence, but an example of a linguistic joke that can be traced back to the blend of Greek words. तो यहाँ पे कोई pedagogy नहीं है, तो 1 में नहीं आएगा ये, 2nd में भी नहीं आएगा, because अभी ये explain कर रहा है कि what is this blend of Greek words. So अभी we are trying to dissect this word. We haven't come to the pedagogical purpose of this. So second statement says the term is a combination of hippopotamus, monstrous, sesquipedalian. The latter being a term used to describe long words or tendency to use long words. So hippopoto or monstro we know. Sesquipedalian means long words describing a tendency to use long words. Intriguingly, despite its length and complexity, is not a term widely accepted in psychological or medical literature, often regarded as more of a humorous term than a clinical diagnosis. It is more of a humorous term. It triggers an immediate curiosity, luring the reader into deeper exploration of phobias and fears associated with language. Okay, now comes the pedagogical purpose. As such, this word in all its cumbersome glory becomes a didactic tool. Okay, didactic means teaching. So now we know that it should come in 3 because the pedagogical purpose clearly comes out. It triggers an immediate curiosity, luring the reader into deeper exploration. As such, this word in all its cumbersome glory becomes a didactic tool, encouraging people to think critically about the fears we associate the language and expression. So this is the pedagogical purpose. So it will come very beautifully in 3 and that's it. All right, so that brings us to an end. So these we did 2 passages, 8 questions and plus 6 VA. These were all, and there again 1 or 2 questions. One question had a problem, I will explain to you, and one had a part problem. The rest were okay. Now, if you look at the remaining 2 VA, one para summary I said, which was the absurd kind of a para summary, totally ridiculous, and there was one para completion that was also quite ambiguous because that sentence could fit in 3 places. In fact, if not 3, at least 2. And again, the justification given is this fits in very nicely as an introductory statement, and which I don't agree with. So it was not a good question, so I've not brought it. All right. So I hope that these passages and these questions, they were interesting enough and you were able to understand. Thank you.